The Amazing Life of Clarence Aloysius Stenger. Many of us who grew up in South Dayton from the early 1960s into the early 1990s remember quite well seeing the large, arched Stengers Ford sign that stood proudly on South Dixie Drive. We remember even more vividly stepping into the enormous showroom of the car dealership for which it advertised. But few people know the fascinating story of the man behind the company. In this video, I hope to introduce you to this amazing gentleman who was not only a brilliant and successful businessman, but also a gallant and decorated Marine Corps and Army veteran who served his country in the time he was most needed. So let's start at the beginning. Clarence Aloysius C.A. Stenger was born on the 18th day of December, 1899, in Harrison Village, Hamilton County, Ohio, to Peter and Mary Wilhelm Stenger. Both sets of his grandparents had been born in Germany and settled in southern Ohio. His father, Peter, had become a blacksmith, and he owned his own shop in Harrison Village. By the time C.A. was born, the Stenger household was already busy. He was their 8th child. From what we've discovered, C.A. had a pretty uneventful childhood and teen years. But a war can make a teenager grow up very quickly. When he was 19, on July 2nd, 1918, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. He was assigned to the 1st Reserve Company Aviation in Philadelphia, and shortly thereafter he was sent to the Mechanic School Detachment at Great Lakes, Illinois. His skill at repairing military machinery would prove to be a great asset, both during World War I and in the future. He was put on inactive reserve status in 1919 and was discharged in July 1922. When he returned to Ohio in 1919, he moved to a boarding house in Dayton and worked for a time as a machine operator at the National Cash Register Company. However, he soon made 2 decisions that set an exciting new course for his life. In June of 1920, he married Lucille V. Mingo from Miamisburg. Andy was hired by B.J. Borchers to sell cars at his Ford dealership, the Borchers Auto Company. The country had fallen in love with the automobile, and the Ford Motor Company was producing thousands of cars per day. In his new job, C.A. had found his true calling. In 1924 and 1925, he was awarded the prestigious Ford Cup, presented to the salesman with the largest number of car sales in the Cincinnati district. With success like this, it was only a matter of time before he was promoted to sales manager of the dealership. This led to the Borcher sales team capturing the selling record in the entire Ohio territory, which comprised the states of Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. In 1926, with aviation becoming an exciting new business, the Borchers team came up with a truly sensational and groundbreaking idea to promote the company. BJ created red, white, and blue covers for cars' autodrome tires. Pictured on the covers were 3 airplanes flying in battle formation with the words Dayton, the city of aviation. They hired a plane from the Johnson Flying Field, and pilot Clyde Emick took to the skies, with CA dropping parachutes to the ground with the tire covers attached. This they did all across the Dayton area, and as they did, on the underside of the airplane was clearly seen the advertisement for Borchers Ford. Customers could also see the Bumblebee, the world's smallest airplane, on display for a week in the Borchers sales room. As you can imagine, this new form of advertising caused quite a stir. In 1929, as a premium for leading in sales numbers yet again, the boss gifted his entire sales team with a 2-hour airplane flight to Detroit, where they were guests of the Ford Motor Company and were given a grand tour of all the facilities. But it wasn't only cars for which C.A. Stenger had a passion. He loved what would now be thought of as extreme sports. One of his favorite things was racing his Chris Craft speedboat. During one particular event in Cincinnati, he nearly won, but ended up coming in a close second after an incident when his boat had been completely turned around in swells that were caused by another boat. And then he had a narrow miss with yet another boat. By that point, his boat partially filled with water, but somehow he was able to finish only 7 seconds behind the winner, who himself had actually won with a world record time of 38 miles per hour. While all these things were happening in his professional life, his family was also growing. On December 30th, 1926, Lucille gave birth to what would be their only child, their son, Thomas Burnett Stenger. They spent his early years living in a home at 2449 Far Hills Avenue. But by 1940, they relocated to a large and beautiful property in Clear Creek Township in Warren County, an estate they called High Hollow Farms. It was here that they would raise Guernsey cattle and collie puppies. They settled into a happy and busy life, and then the world went to war again. When the war broke out, C.A. knew his experience as a mechanic on military vehicles would be needed, so he re-enlisted. In October of 1942, he was commissioned as a major in the Army, and he reported immediately for active duty with a mechanized battalion at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. For Lucille, it was doubly hard, for not only was she to worry about her husband, but their son Tom had also enlisted in the Navy and was headed to Maryland like his father. C.A. arrived in England in 1943. He was a battalion commander on the staff of the 5th Engineer Special Brigade. This unit would be in charge of clearing mines and underwater obstacles, opening up beaches and clearing exit roads on Omaha Beach on D-Day. He was in charge of the brigade's ordnance of about 1,200 vehicles, plus stores of ammunition, gasoline, and other supplies. In a Dayton Daily News article from June 1st, 1964, the 20th anniversary of D-Day, C.A. remembered the events and feelings of the day vividly. The following are his words regarding the night before. "We played poker to beat hell. I guess it took our minds off the invasion. I had a lucky streak and won lots of money." In the dark, on that fateful morning, they loaded up on a landing craft called a rhino ferry, similar to a barge with 2 outboard motors. He continued his story. "We were supposed to land on H plus 4 minutes, but on our way in, our ferry hit a mine, and I had to swim the last quarter of a mile. So we were maybe 15 minutes behind schedule. That didn't give the demolition team much time to cut a path through the underwater obstacles. Then the infantry came in. They were supposed to land at H plus 20, and they were maybe 5 minutes early, so the obstacles didn't get cleared out until late in the afternoon. You have no idea what a stage of confusion an operation like that gets to be. I remember when I was swimming in, a bomb dropped into the water and exploded close enough so I could feel the concussion. I remember the sound of machine gun bullets zipping, sort of skipping across the water, and I could see the spits in the sand when the bullets hit. And the noise, it was terrible. I will never forget that." There were 2 officers who were assigned to be his backup in case he became a casualty. Both were wounded in the landing. One only lasted 35 minutes. The beach soon became clogged with disabled vehicles. Only 3 of 11 bulldozers brought in for the operation were in working condition to help move the vehicles. 27 out of 33 amphibious tanks drowned within 2 or 3 minutes. C.A. said, "They worked in practice but could not take the 6-foot waves." The aerial bombing was ineffective because of fog. Without the tanks, the beach landing lagged, and the infantry and engineers were unable to move because of heavy German fire. His battalion lost 29% of its men before they even started up the hill. The brigade lost 41%. His commanding officer was killed. Somehow they made it up that hill and through the minefields. It was a victory. For his heroism during the war, Clarence Stenger was awarded a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, 4 Battle Stars, a Bronze Arrowhead, the French Croix de Guerre, and a presidential citation. In response, C.A. said, "I guess that wasn't too bad for a guy who was 44 years old on D-Day." He left the service with the rank of lieutenant colonel, and he and his son both returned home to Lucille. He went back to his job at Stengers Ford. A few years later, he was ready to make yet another big change. In May of 1947, with a bank loan of $12,000, he beat out 350 other applicants and won a Ford auto franchise. He then paid Sylvester Burns $100,000 for property from 813 to 827 North Main Street in Dayton. It was here that Stengers Ford opened for business. In true CA style, the dealership became one of the largest and most successful in the region. By 1960, they had outgrown the Main Street location, and plans were announced to open a 6-acre site on South Dixie Drive just north of West Dorothy Lane. It was reported the cost of the building and equipment was estimated to be $500,000. While leasing the land upon which it sat for 50 years would be another $500,000. The facility would measure 240 by 140 feet and would have a 660-foot canopy across the front of the building. There would be a parking area for 600 cars. By 1973, Stengers Ford was the 4th largest Ford dealership in the United States. The annual payroll for its 154 employees was $1,667,154, and the facility now covered 17 acres. Its huge arch sign was a city landmark. The inside of the sales room showcased another of CA's passions, big game hunting. 2 large bears stood proudly by the front door, trophies from an Alaskan hunting expedition in 1956. Lining the walls were moose, antelope, and ram's heads, along with numerous bear skins. They hung alongside the many framed sales awards and photographs of employees. People enjoyed visiting the dealership, whether they were shopping for a car or not. For many years at Christmas, the business featured a live nativity scene featuring real animals, organ concerts, and even a snow machine that sprayed snow all over the front of the building. It was definitely an iconic and unforgettable location, and certainly was a reflection of the man himself. By 1991, with times changing and hunting losing flavor, the animals were removed from the showroom. CA, although semi-retired at the age of 92, still visited the dealership quite often. In March of that year, with annual sales of $22 million and still selling more than 3,000 vehicles, the Stenger family sold 60% of the business to the general manager, Norman Moss, with Tom Stenger holding to the remaining 40%. Clarence Aloysius Stenger died on April 20th, 1993, at the age of 93. His obituary barely scratched the surface of his amazing life. Lucille had passed away in 1975 and he had remarried. His second wife was Norma Jean Copley, and they had remained married until his passing. At the time of his death, he was also survived by his son Thomas, 1 grandson and 1 great-grandson. Sadly, the dealership that he had created is no more. In 1997, a new Stengers location was opened on Alex Bell Road in Centerville, while the South Dixie location was sold and used by Interstate Ford for temporarily storing vehicles that were being leased to the city and county governments across the state. In 2002, it was announced that the building would be torn down to make way for a new Walmart shopping center. The Alex Bell location was sold to the Ford Motor Company in 1999, and it operated as a Planet Ford for a short time before it was closed. There was a lawsuit filed against the owner, Norman Moss, by the Stenger family, but it was settled out of court and the lawsuit was dropped. Thomas Stenger died in February 2006. Like many of the men of his time, C.A. Stenger was a visionary who had a dream and worked to make it come true. He was an important part of Kettering history, and he should be remembered. Thanks for watching.